I see in your eyes the same fear that would take the heart of me. A day may come when the courage of men fails, when we forsake our friends and break all bonds of fellowship. But it is not this day. An hour of wolves and shattered shields when the age of men comes crashing down. But it is not this day. This day we fight. By all that you hold dear on this good earth, I bid you stand! Men of the West!
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
We need to be introspective, and part of being introspective right now in this cold civil war is to look at where we are in this country in terms of the press being a crucial element of the cold civil war, and see if there are some ways that we, through more transparency, as well as perhaps change in tone in some instances, can make ourselves less the issue, the conduct of the press the issue, instead of the conduct of the president and those around him.
With the greatest respect to Carl and his incredible accomplishments, I really think framing this as a matter of two sides is fundamentally misleading. The press, the worst mistakes that, again, when we talk about the press, we exclude Fox. I mean, we talk about press organizations that have an interest in finding truth. Excluding Fox, the worst mistakes that press organizations have made in the coverage of Trump has precisely occurred in their effort, their overzealous effort to be fair to the president. Because the problem they cover is accurate coverage of this president and his campaign is very different from neutral coverage of this president and his campaign. I mean, how do you fairly report the fact that the president lies all the time and that he recruits people to work for him who lie all the time? The worst mistakes, in my opinion,
I'm not talking about neutrality, David. Okay, I'm not talking about neutrality. You're absolutely right.
The worst mistakes that press organizations have made, include CNN made. I mean, Raju and his co-author, the mistake they made, it was important. They promptly corrected it. The worst mistakes CNN has made have been the result of the determination to bring in-house Trump associates in order to promote Trump falsehoods, not from Trump HQ or not from the White House, but with CNN's own brand on them. And
we'll have to disagree on that
occurred.
One. I think we need to hear from Trump supporters, but
you need to hear them, but you need to hear from them as Trump supporters. You don't need to put your own brand on them, and that has been the worst mistake. But that comes from the desire to be unduly fair.
It is Tuesday, December 12th of 2017, and the doors are now open for West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Our daily special today, folks, is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Every Tuesday, Tarrytown Chowder is served up for your enjoyment. And big news day, folks. Got a, well, even if you're not in Alabama, you know there is a Senate election, a race going on right now. And we'll take a little bit of a look at that. I'm with David Waldman. Alabama should be the Alabama they want to be. And whatever that is, I guess they'll tell us. Yep. Like I said, a big news day. One little tidbit that came across my transom here was Alabama's Secretary of State was an election monitor in Russia, and he deemed their election fair and free. Huh. Okay. And of course it wasn't. And he did proclaim that he'd like to implement the Russian tactics in Alabama. And we will actually go over a little story about some of those tactics. They're not calling them Russian tactics, but I'll tell you, I looked at some of the tactics that Russia used and continues to use, and it sounds very, very familiar. Now, let me say a little bit about David Frum. I'm not a big fan of David Frum. It's, circumstances, they say, make strange bedfellows. He's a never-Trumper, and I suppose we can find some way to break bread with never-Trumpers. It's just hard for me to separate the David Frum from the Bush crime family, pontificating on the Trump family crime organization. But he did bring up a salient point. Media like CNN, MSNBC, etc., needs to stop hiring these Trump surrogates with some sort of mistaken belief that is fair and balanced, to allow a lie to be broadcast up against really the truth? Is that what the bean counters consider to be a profitable business model? Because that's what the news is now. Has to be a profitable business model, or you don't get broadcast. Well, you can, but you'll be doing it in, hidden it somewhere in the Northwest with the mothership, and, and then your fellow travelers are able to get their opinions out too. That's not a profitable business model. Trust me, I know. But that is a very salient point, and as much as I despise David Frum, he made a good point, and it's true. We've been saying it. I just am reminded of Driftglass's proclamation that we're liberals. We've been right since before your great-grandma was born. And then what I always say is that, and we always say, we told you so, every single time. Okay, since we have a big news day, I better get into the items that we'll be serving here in the front cafe. And what we have prepared for you back in the kitchen is, we're going to explore why Nazis really like Roy Moore, even though one of his best lawyers is a Jew. Oh, happy Hanukkah, too. Happy Hanukkah. A major donor dumps James O'Keefe after learning he failed to disclose his criminal record. Well, I think if I was in, the hiring department in any company, and James O'Keefe came to my company or my organization, to get a job, I might, I don't know, stop the hiring process just because it's James O'Keefe. But who knows? Who knows? Maybe people are so busy that they wouldn't know. And a bit of sad news here. San Francisco Mayor Ed Lee died unexpectedly this morning at age 65. And we'll go over a bit of his record. And then after the break, we'll move everything back to the chef's table for a more intimate discussion on the Alabama Supreme Court. This is where the Russian tactics come in. They're blocking a digital preservation requirement. A case was brought to the Alabama Supreme Court. Actually, it wended its way up through the courts. And apparently a lower court ruled unfavorably, meaning that there should be a way of verifying ballots. And so the Supreme Court blocked that requirement to verify the vote in today's election. Maybe I'm a romantic, but that sounds Russian to me. And here's a little something that slipped under the radar, and it had me, I don't know, ambassadorships, they come and go. I mean, they're just given as perks anyway, right? We all know that. But this was never brought up in this ambassador's confirmation hearing, though maybe it's because I'm so old and I was enamored with the Watergate investigation. But the guy who is the new U.S. ambassador to the Czech Republic once kidnapped Martha Mitchell, who, of course, was the wife of former Attorney General John Mitchell, and pistol whipped her to shut her up about Watergate. But as we all know, it didn't work. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. All right, we better dive right into these dishes that we prepared for you. But let me mention real quickly. It always amazes me that mobsters, and this is, I have to say it's not anecdotal, but it is, I would say, an historical fact, that when mobsters go to court, it's a bit amazing how their legal defense will be to attack the judge, the prosecutor, the cops. So when Trump's lawyer, Jay Sekulow, today says that he's calling for a special counsel to investigate special counsel Mueller's team, for conflicts of interest. Apparently, anybody who doesn't have absolute fealty to Trump is, isn't a human being, and they should not have any opinion at all. It sounds very mobsterish to me. So, but authoritarians love doing that, and they not only love doing it, it's part of their strategy, and it's a well-practiced strategy, and it seems to work. And you can look at a certain large country with a Cyrillic alphabet as, evidence of that tactic working quite well over and over and over. All right, this first article is by Michael Edison Hayden out of Newsweek. Well, America, neo-Nazis picked a dog in the fight of the Alabama Senate race. Nope, it's not Democrat Doug Jones. Robert Warren Ray, an avowed white supremacist who writes for Daily Stormer, a neo-Nazi website that has been kicked off over a dozen domains after the violence that transpired in Charlottesville, Virginia this August, endorsed embattled Republican candidate Roy Moore. His reasoning? Moore, who faces allegations of sexual misconduct from 8 women, in some cases from actions he allegedly took against them as teens. Why does this Robert Warren Ray endorse Roy Moore? Because Moore quoted Adolf Hitler correctly. All right. He speaks pretty good German, though I should say anybody who goes to military school and officer training, you learn typical greetings in Russian, and they probably teach you how to speak Arabic now too. You never know. I mean, whoever is the Goldstein, you're going to learn their language. Moore used Hitler's big lie quote and actually used it correctly, rather than claiming it meant Hitler was admitting to be a big liar all the time, as our politicians and media always do, Ray wrote. The big lie is that, remember, the quote is that if you tell a big lie, people will tend to believe it, and a small lie, they won't. And with a big lie, you just, no matter how outlandish, in fact, the more outlandish it is, the more it'll be believed, because it's so outlandish, it must be true. And you say it over and over and over. But apparently, we've been misquoting Hitler all this time. And I actually thought it was because it was Goebbels, but that's just me. It was referring to a statement Moore made in 2011 on what CNN described as a conspiracy-driven radio show. It was really a neo-Nazi site, but, conspiracy-driven. About Obama's birth certificate. Okay. And so Ray wrote in his tweets or his statement, they put quotation marks, 3 quotation marks around words, and he has media in these 3 quotation marks. And just as a reminder, or if you don't know, that's actually an explicitly anti-Semitic connotation. So, happy Hanukkah. And I also want to break in real quick, because Roy Moore, at a speech last night, claims that, his wife, in defense of her husband and their campaign, because apparently the media, with the 3 quotation marks around it, have been spreading lies and fake news, and making connotations that Moore may be anti-Semitic. And she put the lie to that notion when she told everybody there that they can't be anti-Semitic because one of their lawyers is a Jew. Not Jewish, a Jew. So there, that proves it. Some of my best lawyers are Jews. I can't be against Jews. Okay. Especially if they're wearing their little yarmulkes and counting money. There's nothing anti-Semitic about that. All right. Well, CNN had published a report about Moore's appearances on that neo-Nazi, what CNN called a conspiracy-driven radio show. It's a neo-Nazi radio show. Come on. And the context of the quote from Moore's appearance on the radio show said, well, that's a problem. Hitler once said, you tell a big enough lie long enough, people to believe it. And that's the problem. We've got to look at simple facts of the case, and we need to recognize we need a new administration in Washington. And it just doesn't, it's not based on party. This guy makes no sense. You write down what he says and he makes no sense. We need, people that uphold the Constitution, not undermine it, Moore said of Obama. Now, what was the horrendous overplay of power by Obama? Health care. Just wanted to make sure that the insurance companies were not selling junk policies in health care. But apparently that's socialism. But, you can't make the Russian joke with Moore because, Russia's not a socialist country anymore. It's a mobbed up country. Yep. Roy was also elated by Moore telling the host of the radio show that getting rid of constitutional amendments after the 10th Amendment would eliminate many problems in the country. And eliminating those amendments would, among other things, limit voting in America to an activity practiced only by white men. Actually, white men with property. And I think a lot of neo-Nazis, they don't really own the property that their trailer is on. They rent that. They don't have title to that. And I don't think owning, like a car or a trailer is going to be sufficient for a landed gentry to be able to vote. A white landed gentry to be able to vote. You got to have land. Land. And I'm telling you, nope. It's, so let's put it in the context of the founders. You have a pack mule and you want to say that you are able to vote? Get out of here. We're talking about land. And you can hire George over there, George Washington, big tall guy, and he'll survey that property for you for a fee. Okay. Now, Daily Stormer is unequivocally not the kind of endorsement a normal candidate running for any office on planet Earth would want to have. The site has venerated the man suspected of murdering anti-racist activist Heather Heyer in Charlottesville this August, with memes and attempted to dismiss the seriousness of his alleged crime by promoting a vulgar sexist conspiracy theory about her death. The Daily Stormer also frequently calls for the harassment of Jewish people and people of color. The site also vocally supports violence against women and spousal abuse. Newsweek reached out to Moore's campaign for a comment on the endorsement, but did not receive a response. Well, actually, the response was last night by Mrs. Moore when she said, "Our lawyer is a Jew." All right, this next course is a small little course, but it packs a punch, quite tasty. It is by Brad Reed out of Raw Story. James O'Keefe's Project Veritas has just lost a major donor in the wake of revelations that the right-wing dirty trickster failed to disclose his past criminal record. Dirty trickster, that's a nice way of putting it. Roger Stone calls his group and what they do. And he's called it this way since he and Segretti were buddies back during CREEP. Yeah, CREEP, Committee to Re-elect the President, one Richard Nixon. Roger Stone called it rat fucking. That's what James O'Keefe does. Dirty trickster. The reason they said dirty trickster in the Washington Post is because, Bernstein wanted to put in rat fucker. And Ed Bradley said, nah, we'll use dirty trickster. And so there a meme was created. The Chisholm Foundation, which has donated at least, I love this, at least $136,000 to Project Veritas since 2011, because I think $136,000 is a little low. But at least they will stop supporting the group because it recently learned that Project Veritas was deregistered as a charity in Mississippi over O'Keefe's failure to disclose his criminal record. Now, I think the foundation knew about the criminal record, but the people that in Mississippi, the regulators in Mississippi that register charities and you get taxed accordingly. And if you lie on those forms, and yes, by not offering information is tantamount to lying in tort law. Irrespective of other possible concerns, the Chisholm Foundation will not be supporting Project Veritas in the future because it does not meet this basic standard, the foundation explained in an email. O'Keefe, who has been getting raked over the coals recently over his failed sting operation against the Washington Post, pleaded guilty in 2010 to a misdemeanor of entering government property under false pretenses during a similarly failed sting operation of then Democratic Louisiana Senator Mary Landrieu. Well, now if he can just get the Mercer money rescinded, we might have something there, wouldn't we? All right, this last story is by way of the San Francisco Chronicle, Rachel Swan and Evan Cernovsky. In a bit of breaking news here this morning, Mayor Ed Lee, the city's first Asian American mayor and the man who presided over San Francisco's rise to the top of the tech world, died early today after suffering a heart attack. He was 65. Lee collapsed while shopping at the Safeway grocery store on Monterey Boulevard near his Glen Park home at about 10:30 p.m. and was taken by ambulance to San Francisco General Hospital, where he died at 1:11 a.m., surrounded by his friends and family. The mayor's office released a brief statement early this morning confirming Lee's death, stating in part, "Our thoughts and prayers are with his wife Anita, his two daughters Brianna and Tanya, and his family." News of Lee's unexpected death shocked and saddened city officials, many of whom respected the moderate mayor even when he was their political adversary. "I was utterly and totally grief-stricken," said Supervisor Malia Cohen, who wept as she spoke Monday morning. "My heart breaks for Lee's wife, Anita, and the mayor's daughters. The entire city family is grieving right now. It's very stressful and a difficult time. We'll get through it together. I'm in shock. It's still hard for me to believe. I was just with him on Saturday." Supervisor Aaron Peskin was crying as well, remembering Lee. "Even though he didn't support me when I ran for supervisor a couple of years ago, he was somebody who was a brother who I admired, not only as the first Chinese American in San Francisco, but as somebody who loved the community and was fun to hang out with," Peskin said. Lee, known for his friendly and often jokey personality and his focus on details and political consensus, was the 43rd mayor of San Francisco and the first Asian American to lead the city. Board of Supervisors President London Breed became acting mayor effective immediately. Lee was city administrator in January 2011 when the Board of Supervisors appointed him to replace Mayor Gavin Newsom, who had been elected the state's lieutenant governor. He wasn't initially interested in being mayor, but relented and took the job after a public campaign led by Chinese American civic leaders. The slogan was "Run, Ed, Run." He said he wasn't interested in a full term, but after solid job reviews and months of urging from former Mayor Willie Brown, the late Chinatown power broker Rose Pack, and ultimately Senator Dianne Feinstein, Lee then changed his mind. I should mention Rose Pack was never a fan of Lee and actively worked against him, but she also knew where consensus lay, and some might call her a cynical politician, and others might call her, well, she was a politician, and the cynicism really did achieve noble ends. For those of you who remember Rose Pack. A little bit of background. Lee was born in Seattle, the fourth of 6 children of immigrant parents, and grew up in housing projects. His father was a cook, his mother a seamstress. He won a scholarship to Bowdoin College in Maine and then went to UC Berkeley Law School. He met his wife Anita in 1974 when he was studying in her native Hong Kong, where she was his Mandarin tutor. Ni hao ma. Before he worked for the city, Lee fought it. As a law student and intern at the Asian Law Caucus in 1978, he represented residents of the Pingyuan public housing complex who were angry over unsafe and unsanitary conditions in the first tenant rent strike against the San Francisco Housing Authority. Lee threatened to use whatever avenues we have to make the Housing Authority responsible to the tenants, and the Housing Authority finally agreed to provide security. He went on to a distinguished career as a civil rights attorney, often representing low-income tenants. In 1989, Lee represented Asian and female firefighters who joined others in successfully suing the city for discrimination at the fire department. He was a great mayor and a great leader. More important, he was a great family man, said San Francisco Fire Chief Joanne Hayes White. It was an honor to work for him. He passed away way too young. I'm still in disbelief. And, of course, Hayes White is the city's first female fire chief. Lee spent decades working for the city, eventually becoming director of public works and city administrator, overseeing multiple departments. Sometimes it takes a wonk and a bureaucrat to be able to run a government, doesn't it? Which I suppose if you're also from immigrant parents makes you the worst kind in today's new a-go-go world. All right, let's get to our break, and we'll come back and have everything set up at the chef's table for you. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
Last year, America's largest internet provider, Comcast, took over the second largest, Time Warner. So Comcast is now a coast-to-coast beast, running its proprietary lines into 25 million of our homes. Bad enough that this market power allows the internet giant to gouge consumers, but it has an even more sinister reason for muscling up. Comcast, along with a handful of other internet service corporations, intend to eviscerate the pure egalitarian ethic of net neutrality. The great virtue of the internet is that no one controls its content. This digital communication technology has been so successful and socially valuable because it is a wide-open democratic forum, accessible on equal terms to all who want to put information, images, opinions, etc. on it, or to download any of the same from it. But if corporate powers could restrict the flow of internet communication, they could collect billions in tolls for privileged access. Thus, the real motivation behind Comcast's 2016 mega-merger was that their added market control would set them up to be the very gatekeeper that the internet community doesn't need and adamantly opposes. Want it or not, though, lobbyists for Comcast and the few other giants that own practically all of the wires that link U.S. internet users to the global web now have Donald Trump's support to let them dictate to the millions of content providers what can go through the wires and on what terms. Rather than having one big broadband freeway open for transporting everyone's internet content, these monopolists intend to create express toll lanes they can sell at a premium to the richest content providers, leaving all other providers stuck in the slow lanes. This is Jim Hightower saying, there's still time to fight back. Go to battleforthenet.com to help put a stop to this corporate coup.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labour.
This is a Radio Labour report recorded on Monday, December 11th, 2017. I'm Mark Boulanger.
The Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
That is Eleanor Roosevelt reading the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations on December 10th, 1948. Ms. Roosevelt was the chair of the UN Commission that drafted the declaration. Amongst the human rights proclaimed as universal by the UN are employment, pay equity, union membership, time off work, free education, and respect for the work of artists.
Article 23.1. Everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and to protection against unemployment. 2. Everyone, without any discrimination, has the right to equal pay for equal work. 3. Everyone who works has the right to just and favorable remuneration, ensuring for himself and his family an existence worthy of human dignity, and supplemented, if necessary, by other means of social protection. 4. Everyone has the right to form and to join trade unions for the protection of his interests. Article 24. Everyone has the right to rest and leisure, including reasonable limitations of working hours and periodic holidays with pay. Article 25(1). Everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and of his family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control. Everyone has the right to education. Education shall be free, at least in the elementary and fundamental stages. Elementary education shall be compulsory. Technical and professional education shall be made generally available, and higher education shall be equally accessible to all on the basis of merit. 2. Education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality and to the strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. It shall promote understanding, tolerance, and friendship among all nations, racial or religious groups, and shall further the activities of the United Nations for the maintenance of peace. Article 27(1). Everyone has the right freely to participate in the cultural life of the community, to enjoy the arts, and to share in scientific advancement and its benefits. 2. Everyone has the right to the protection of the moral and material interests resulting from any scientific, literary, or artistic production of which he is the author. Article 28. Everyone is entitled to a social and international order in which the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration can be fully realized.
This week, India is our hotspot for union activity. Here with his report is Labour Start correspondent Derek Blackadder.
Our hotspot this week is India. A strike by public sector nurses in India was broken last week after the courts threatened to jail union members participating in the strike. A state Supreme Court justice told the nurses to quit their jobs and work elsewhere if they were unhappy with their wages. Also last week, a British university study found that 48,000 workplace deaths can be confirmed in India each year. Many others go unreported, and even this total does not include the victims of occupational disease. 280 factory workers have been occupying their workplace since the 21st of November in an effort to force their employer to recognize their union. This is a common union tactic in a country where labor rights exist but are not actively enforced. And finally, a state government has ordered the dismissal of 80,000 striking healthcare workers, throwing the state's medical system into disarray. The issue in the strike? The regularization of contract workers. Regularization is a common cause of strike action in India where there are two classes of workers, regular and contractual. Regular workers have many more rights and entitlements than do day or casual workers under Indian labor law. This is Derek Blackadder from Labour Start, reporting for Radio Labour.
And that's it. International labor news you can use. I'm Mark Boulanger. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's all about global solidarity.
So thank you for accompanying us back to the chef's table. We've got everything set up for you. And while we're putting some final touches to the substantial dishes we have offered today, we'll take a look at local and world weather. And here along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of southern Oregon. That's where the mothership for Netroots Radio is located. So don't be using any cluster bombs. These people are innocent. Well, is anyone innocent? Regardless, currently it is 24 degrees Fahrenheit, and surprisingly, it even feels like 24 degrees Fahrenheit. We will be achieving a high of 53 today, with a low of tonight back in the mid-20s. Mid-20s. Winds are light and variable currently out of the southwest. Air quality index is only moderate. A lot of wood being burned for heat, and not really cooking, but you never know. But certainly heat. So if you have some breathing problems, filter your air. Pressure is holding at 30.49 inches. Visibility is 8 miles. We are under an air stagnation advisory, as I mentioned, and also a freezing fog advisory. It is against the law in Oregon to drive your car without your windshield being properly defrosted. And so scraping sometimes isn't enough, and you can't scrape just a little hole. So get your windshield clear. Take some time. Humidity at 57%. Okay. All right. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased, and these people live around the world. London is 38 and sunny. Paris is 40 and fair. Rome is 60 and mostly cloudy. Kiev is 40 and fair. Kabul is 36 and fair. Hong Kong is 65 and fair. Tokyo is 41 and clear. Sydney, Australia is 69 degrees and clear. San Francisco, California is 47 and partly cloudy. And New York is 50 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. And these people live around the world. Okay, we're all comfortable here at the chef's table. Well, good. This next article is by Stephen Rosenfeld out of Alternet. The Alabama Supreme Court stepped in today's U.S. Senate race between Republican Roy Moore and Democrat Doug Jones last night by blocking a lower court's ruling earlier yesterday that ordered election officials to take steps to preserve digital images of every ballot cast today. In effect, the Alabama Supreme Court stay or freezing of an earlier court order to preserve the digital ballot images undermines the best-case scenario for ensuring that an accurate vote count can be verified in the controversial Senate race. Well, if there's any possibility of Roy Moore losing, why would you want an accurate vote count? I mean, come on. The guy's got to win. They need those votes for a tax cut. Alabama Supreme Court, where Moore served as Chief Justice, did not issue an explanation with the stay. However, a lengthy brief filed at the close of business by the state on behalf of Alabama Secretary of State John Merrill contained a list of eyebrow-raising assertions, such as Merrill had no authority to tell local election officials how to operate their voting machines. The state also said only private vendors holding contracts to program the machines could do so, and that it was, just too late for that. Our elections are privatized, so we're sorry. Proprietary ownership. I'm sorry. You want a recount? Okay. There's your fingers. You got 10 if you count your thumbs. Come on. Oh, my God. The only defendants in this case, Secretary of State John Merrill and a member of his staff, do not have authority to make changes to voting machines or to require local officials to do so, the state's brief said. Nice. Chris Chowder, a Washington-based lawyer specializing in election law, who helped the Alabama-based legal team and plaintiffs, said Merrill's argument was plainly disingenuous and designed to sabotage the necessary steps to ensure the full public record in today's election will not be destroyed. At issue in the case is the simple fact that Merrill and his election staff refused to tell county election officials to check one box in the software running the scanners that will read the ink-marked paper ballots and tabulate the vote today. Everything else cited by Merrill's attorneys is a legalistic sideshow distracting from this basic fact. However, the 11th hour intervention by the state Supreme Court all but runs out the clock on any appellate process that could be meaningfully executed today. Because by the time, it wends its way into a higher court, the person will already have been installed as the Senate from Alabama. The state's brief shows how far Alabama's red-run state government will go to obstruct the best practices to verify the vote count. To start, the state argues that all paper ballots will be preserved, even though they are not what's used to tabulate the statewide vote total. I keep hearing this too. Well, they're going to keep all the paper ballots. Yeah, but they don't use the paper ballots, unfortunately, for a recount. Isn't that convenient? The state's brief also said the ballot images are not retained by their voting machinery, but doesn't say why. Why? Because a box on the computer screen needs to be checked, and apparently, Grandma Millie over there down there. I mean, she barely knows how to use a push button phone. You don't expect her to be dealing with one of these newfangled computer machines, do you? Check a box. I don't know. That's the assertion that they're making. As the brief continues, some voting machines take a digital image of voters' paper ballots, and presently most machines do not retain that image. Instead, the paper ballots are preserved in the event of an election, contest, or other need to examine the records. But they don't use the other needs to examine the records. Okay. And then the state went on to say that no county election official was capable of checking that box on the software operating the ballot scanners. So then when they were caught in that lie, they said, oh, yeah, but, everything's proprietary. If you check that box, you're violating terms of use, and they just might, right in the middle of the election, stop our feed. We can't do that. The voting machines are under the authority of the probate judges, not the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State is not party to the contracts between probate judges and ES&S, who is the company that owns the voting machines. To change the machine's program would require a third-party vendor or an ES&S to go to 2,000 machines around the state. Okay, yeah, we'll send our representative. We have one. You need it by today? So this is a real-time snapshot of how partisans hijack elections. The arguments put forth by Merrill's attorneys are not meant to sound neutral and technical. They are meant to sound neutral and technical, when actually they are explicit partisan conflicts of interest. These arguments clearly paper over the fact that the state has no intention of using best practices to ensure transparent vote counts, just as the state is willfully ignoring state and federal law to preserve all election materials as a public record. If you have a public record, you might get caught in your lie, won't you? Alabama has a long history of suppressing the vote, including this past decade, in which the GOP has used a menu of tactics, from extreme gerrymandering to toughening ID requirements to get a ballot. Oh yeah, that was the other thing. They closed all the DMV offices this past week. Oh, and you need a license from the DMV so you can vote. Isn't that convenient? But this last-minute intervention by the Alabama Supreme Court to muddy the vote count in a U.S. Senate race where a former Chief Justice is a candidate breaks new boundaries. Well, I don't know. When you get to a certain, age, I don't know if it's wisdom, but I will say I've seen this before. Okay, this last offering here back at the chef's table is by Jeff Stein out of Newsweek. We rarely pay attention to ambassadorships, but in this instance, I just think it's funny because I've mentioned before about just generally with the Trump administration, when you have, old rat fuckers like Roger Stone and his crew, and you have, well, let's just put it this way. It seems like this is get back for Watergate. They tried it with the Bush crime family, but with this group, it reminds me of the line in Blues Brothers: "We're getting the band back together." And this fellow who is the new U.S. ambassador to the Czech Republic was right in the midst of it. In fact, he's very reminiscent to Trump's personal bodyguard. Yeah. I believe Schiller is his name. All right. American presidents have a long history of awarding ambassadorships to colorful characters as a way to thank them for their campaign donations. Roughly a third of U.S. ambassadors have no diplomatic experience beyond rounding up cash for successful presidential candidates. And among them is Stephen King, 76, a longtime confidant and booster of House Speaker Paul Ryan, who is now the new U.S. ambassador to the Czech Republic. And King, who is also a former business partner of Ryan's brother Tobin, has no diplomatic experience and never spent a day in Prague before taking up his post there on December 7th. Radio Prague, the official state news outlet, called him, quote, a rich Republican businessman who worked for the FBI early in his career. Though, when he was working for CREEP, the Committee to Re-elect the President, don't you love that acronym? I mean, was that purposeful? Or was that by accident? I will remind folks that one of the Nixon daughters convinced Richard to allow the Jefferson airplane to play like at a Christmas party or some big event. Because Richard says, we need to get some of those young people's sounds. What do you think young people like today, Tricia? And they said, I've been hearing a lot about this group from San Francisco called the Jefferson Airplane. They sound like they might be fun. And they were. And Grace Slick came in like her face painted purple and called out Nixon for being a war criminal. Things like that. That went well. And so I would almost think that the idea of CREEP, that acronym, was by accident. Because, really, crooks are stupid. They always think they are smarter than the cops. Left unsaid was that King played a crucial role in the 1972 Watergate affair, and not a good one. King helped cover up ties between Richard Nixon's re-election campaign and the burglars arrested inside the Democratic Party headquarters at the Watergate complex, and in a particularly violent fashion, but none of that came up during his confirmation hearing. So his duty on the week of the break-in was to protect and keep a close eye on Martha Mitchell, the talkative wife of Nixon's campaign director and former Attorney General John Mitchell, while the Mitchells were on a campaign swing in California. Now, Martha Mitchell, oftentimes called an outspoken Arkansan, was also dubbed the mouth of the South. And she had been complaining vaguely to anyone who would listen about campaign operatives carrying out dirty tricks against the Democrats. So when she learned that James McCord, the security director of CREEP, who had served as her bodyguard, was among those arrested at the Watergate, and described by her husband as a private security contractor who was not operating either on our behalf or with our consent, she picked up the telephone and called Helen Thomas. Yes, the institution of Washington, that Helen Thomas. Well, enter King. He rushed into the bedroom, threw her back across the bed, ripped the telephone out of the wall, and but Thomas was still on the phone and taking notes. The conversation ended abruptly when it appeared someone took the phone away from her hand, and Helen Thomas reported that she was heard to say, meaning Martha Mitchell, "You just get away," click. Thomas added that when she called back, the hotel operator told her, "Mrs. Mitchell is indisposed and cannot talk." Well, the Thomas story was a sensation. Reporters scurried to find Mitchell for a follow-up, and a few days later, one did. Marcia Kramer of the New York Daily News tracked her down where she was hiding out, the Westchester Country Club in Rye, New York. And Kramer described Mitchell as a beaten woman with incredible black and blue marks on her arms in what looked like a total professional job. I should mention also she wore big sunglasses, the really big kind, owl kind, because this guy King pistol whipped her. And I will say that Mitchell's claim was not taken seriously by many, because she was also known to imbibe a drink here and there. If you think that they drank in Mad Men, Martha Mitchell could drink those people right under the table. But few took her seriously, and the Nixon administration used her drinking as a cudgel. And she claimed that this guy King pistol whipped her. And in fact, he did. And more people took it seriously after the fact. So quite a story. And if you want to know the kinds of people that populate the Trump administration, I think this fellow is emblematic of the mob mentality, the thuggish mentality, and actions that, these people are willing to take. Well, this brings us to the end of our broadcast period for today, but we will be back here tomorrow, bright and bushy, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. We'll have the front cafe and the chef's table all cleaned up, ready for some new news for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. I don't know. Is that some sort of religious connotation, or is it an egg dish? We'll have to find out, won't we? Well, please do come back. Of course, we have great content between here and now. In fact, on Netroots Radio, there's great content 24/7, 365. So continue listening to Netroots Radio, and do join us tomorrow in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, de manger jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre. Tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre. Tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.